tonight. We have some excellent presenters. I think we're really going to be informed when this meeting's over. So let's hit the meeting.
And we sent out the minutes ahead of time from the last meeting, as well as, they were brief, as well as the agenda and all the reports from the different committees. Are they approved? Is there a motion to approve them? And are there any objections?
So moved.
Thank you. Okay. And then next, we're going to go to the anthem, which I'm very excited about. Hold on one second. And if everybody could mute themselves during this, that would be great. Now for our anthem.
I'm Laura, and I'm part of the College Outreach Committee along with Kim Alexander and Sharifa. And Kendall was on that and participated in some of the events. She's moving on to some other things as well. But I think some of you got the update on what happened in May, which was very exciting. We collaborated with the college, Brandon Jackson, Mara was there on May 2nd during their spring fling. We had a very successful indoor and outdoor activity. Kim had an information table. The scholarship committee was there. Kim was great at getting people who walked by to inform them about the NAACP. Some members were signed up, students. And also, Kim, you can chime in if you want to. There were also additions to the list of people who were applying for the scholarship. So it was very exciting. And we had a lot of successful interactions at the table outside during tie-dye as well. And we recruited people to come back in the evening for the bonfire, which was really, really, really special and very nice. I would say each of the activities maybe had 35, 40 people participate, and Mariah Hines was there doing fire dancing. And kudos to Kim for all of her collaboration and behind the scenes, along with Sharifa, contributing to the activities. While we were kind of with that momentum, the idea came up to feed some of the students the first Monday of finals week. And so Sharifa planned and cooked up a storm with Kim's assistance and some other folks with Sharifa. And she was able to provide a really, really nice meal that evening. Unfortunately, circumstances had it that baseball teams were out, and some of the students had actually finished early and had gone home. But as we move forward, we're going to collaborate this summer, I think midsummer, Kim, with Brandon and some of the college people and survey the students to see how we can engage them and get their ideas of activities for next year. So Kim, what did I forget?
I think you got everything, Laura. It was really fun. I really enjoyed myself. And yes, Mar, we met at the table and she's here now.
Yeah.
And I'm feeling really excited about next year. So I think we'll have fun.
It was energizing, and it was a positive response that they came back in the evening. I mean, the connection was made, and it just seemed real natural and real nice. So thank you.
Great. Thank you so much. All right, on to Devin.
Hey, welcome everyone. AAPI Heritage Month. It's a yearly celebration that recognizes the countless contributions of Asians and Pacific Islanders to the United States. Tonight's presentation is close to my heart. As a Hapa, which is Hawaiian for someone with mixed ethnicity, my dad is Hawaiian Filipino and my mom is Caucasian, I've been afforded the opportunity of living in two worlds. This has been an unbelievably enriching experience, but not one without its moments of alienation and epiphanies. There's a beautiful tapestry of culture that Asians and Pacific Islanders contribute to our nation's melting pot. However, our presence, contributions, and histories are often misunderstood, ignored, or forgotten. Tonight, we place a spotlight on AAPI heritage. We are honored to host three special guest speakers, Ashwani Jain, Kiyoka Rhodes, and Marlysse calling. The presentations will be followed by a Q&A. Please add your questions in the chat box below. And now for the introduction of our first speaker. Ashwani Jain is a 32-year-old Maryland native, cancer survivor, and son of immigrants and small business owners. He has experience working in the public, private, and nonprofit sectors, including President Obama's White House. He's currently program director for the National Kidney Foundation and ambassador for the Make-A-Wish Foundation. Mr. Jain is running for Maryland governor to make politics inclusive and accessible because he believes decisions about us should not be made without us.
Thank you everyone so much for this work that you're doing, for this particular meeting and event that you're organizing, and for allowing me to share a couple of remarks, and then if we have time to have a conversation or answer questions. So a little bit more about me, and in addition to why I celebrate AAPI Heritage Month, my name is Ashwani Jain. I use he, him pronouns. I'm a 32-year-old cancer survivor. I'm a son of Asian immigrants and small business owners, and I'm a product of Maryland public schools. I have been able to work in the public, in the private, and in the nonprofit sectors, including the Obama White House and 2 federal agencies. And I'm running for Maryland governor to really elevate the work of groups like the NAACP and actually make politics inclusive and accessible. Now, this idea of inclusion first started when I was diagnosed with cancer at the age of 13. During that time, I didn't think I would get to leave the 4 walls of that hospital room. And I had no control over my life. I was told when to wake up, when to sleep, what to eat, what medicines to take. I lost all my hair and my confidence, and I felt depressed, I felt suicidal, and I felt helpless. It hurt to have other people make decisions for me instead of with me. And the ironic and unfortunate thing is, so many Americans, so many Marylanders feel that way about politics right now. If you are black or brown, you feel like this country doesn't value your life. If you're trans, you feel like your life is under assault. If you're a woman, you feel disgusted that men can still decide what you do with your own body. If you're someone with a disability, you feel talked down to. If you're an undocumented immigrant, you feel like you give so much to a society that says you don't belong. If you live in a rural area, you feel forgotten about. And if you're a young person, especially a young person of color, you are told you don't have enough experience to lead on issues, even though it's been young people who led the feminist, labor, climate, and the Black Lives Matter movements. But I believe that decisions about us should not be made without us. Because when you speak about any issue, and any of the issues that you all have worked on, if residents are not given a seat at the table from day one, then none of the policies will actually be equitable. And we see this in every election. Unfortunately, as the only AAPI candidate for governor in the state of Maryland, and as someone who would be Maryland's first AAPI governor if elected, and as someone who would be the nation's youngest governor, I am often told that I do not have what it takes. And this is something many young people and many people of color are told. And that's why many of them feel intimidated or left out of the political process. You know, they tell us to be governor, you have to be over 40 or have elected experience. And yet somehow as a 32-year-old, I've been able to work in the public, private, and nonprofit sectors, help manage the political appointee process in the Obama White House, work on healthcare at the U.S. Department of Health, work on housing at the U.S. Department of Housing, and help get the NIH and the FDA billions when I was then Vice President Biden's Director of Outreach for a healthcare program called the Cancer Moonshot. But does that matter? They tell people like us that to be governor, residents should not be making your policy and strategy. But somehow we have created the first statewide campaign in the United States that is 100% run by residents and from every age, every background, and all 24 of our counties. But does it matter? They tell us to be governor, you should not take definitive policy stances. But somehow we have shared the most comprehensive and fully paid for policy agenda over a year and a half ago in January of 2021. But does that matter? They tell us to be governor, you have to spend 90% of your time talking to donors and those with connections. And yet somehow I'm the only governor candidate to spend 90% of my time meeting voters at their homes and in a different county every day of the week. But does that matter? And finally, they say to be governor, you have to raise a ton of money. And yet somehow we have built one of the largest grassroots campaigns without hosting a single fundraiser and without taking a penny from developers, businesses, PACs, or polluters. But does it matter? Does it matter how people at any level run campaigns? I think it does. And it will translate to policy, and it translates to how we govern. And if we want more AAPIs and people of color and young people represented in politics, we have to make the political process, starting with campaigns, genuinely more inclusive and accessible. So yes, I may not have what it takes to just be any governor, but I would be a new kind of leader, a new kind of governor, one who is the most accessible, most accountable, and most transparent. Because we're not just trying to win an election. We're trying to change our politics for generations to come and really elevate the work that people like you were doing. That's how we move forward.
All right. Thank you so much, Ashwani. What we're going to do is we're going to have a Q&A after all the presentations. You just want to stay for a few more minutes. That gives enough time for people to get the brain juices going and put the questions in the chat room. We're going to move on to our next speaker. Next, we have Kiyoka Rhodes. Her nickname is Kex. She is an Emmy-nominated producer, director, and filmmaker based in DC. Originally from San Diego, she grew up in the DMV area. She's biracial, half Black and half Japanese. Tonight, Kex will discuss her short film, Desolate Dreams, which dives into Black and Asian solidarity, the Japanese-American internment, and the 442nd Infantry that served during World War II. Take it away, Kex.
Thank you so much, Devin, for that introduction. And thank you so much for having me be a part of this event tonight. It's such an honor. So as Devin mentioned, I'd like to take some time tonight to highlight one of my projects, Desolate Dreams. It's an upcoming short film. As Devin mentioned, it touches on the incarceration of Japanese Americans and those of Japanese ancestry in the United States. And it also looks at Black and Asian solidarity and the 442nd Regimental Combat Team that served during World War II. As someone who is Black and Japanese, I wanted to explore those two cultures during the time of World War II. And these two cultures coming together and standing alongside each other in solidarity in a society that didn't see them as American nor equal. So Desolate Dreams is a dramatic narrative short film, and it's set in 1942 downtown Los Angeles. It follows an African-American journalist who advocates for justice alongside a Japanese-American family forced into a prison camp. And this took place after President FDR issued the Executive Order 9066 following the events of Pearl Harbor. And before I talk a little bit about the history of this, just some backstory on the inspiration behind the world of the film, the characters. So the African-American journalist was greatly inspired by this newspaper called the California Eagle, which is this left image here. And the California Eagle was an African-American newspaper in Los Angeles, and they did African-American news. And a lot of the African-American journalists made efforts to combat race discrimination in LA at that time. And this individual in this picture is John Kinloch, and I was greatly inspired to develop this character in the film named Robert Parker, who you see in this concept art there on the left. And the Japanese American family was inspired by the Shishima family, who is seen on the left, or I'm sorry, the right of the slide. And particularly, I had an opportunity to speak with Bill Shishima, who is seen in this back row here, the third person on the right. And this was an exhibit that was at the Smithsonian's National Museum of American History. And that's really where Desolate Dreams began, at that exhibit. So the family in the film was greatly inspired by the Shishima family. And I kind of forged these two worlds together and developed the plot for this film. And the images below here, concept art by a colleague of mine, Lulu, who did concept art when we were developing the fundraising teaser last year. So a little bit about the history before I talk more about Desolate Dreams. For those who may not be aware about the history, so the Executive Order 9066 and the Exclusion Order are oftentimes used interchangeably, and they're actually two different things. So the Executive Order 9066 was issued by President Franklin Roosevelt on February 19th, 1942. And today that's known as the Day of Remembrance. So about 2 months after Pearl Harbor happened in December, this executive order was issued, and it authorized the forced removal of all persons deemed a threat to national security from the West Coast to relocation centers further inland. The interesting thing about the executive order is that it did not state particularly an ethnic group to be excluded, but because President FDR issued this, it gave military commanders authority to exclude civilians in different military zones. And particularly that was Lieutenant General John L. DeWitt of the Western Defense Command, who then proceeded with the exclusion of Japanese Americans and those of Japanese ancestry. So there were different military zones on the western part of the United States. And I have a map here that shows those exclusion areas seen on the left of this map in the red markings. There were 108 exclusion orders that were put around the neighborhoods and the towns, and 10 camps that were put across the US. And I have two images here on the left. One shows a military commander, soldier hammering a exclusion order on the wall. A lot of times they were on the walls or on electrical posts around the neighborhoods and towns. And it was the notice for Japanese Americans to evacuate. And many of them had a week to sell their assets, to sell their business, to pack only necessary items as listed on the order. And from there, Many were transported to holding facilities and then eventually the camps. And there were 10 camps across the US from California all the way to Arkansas. And Manzanar was actually the largest camp, which was in California. In Desolate Dreams, my short film, I'm focusing more on Heart Mountain, since the Shishima family was incarcerated at the Heart Mountain War Relocation Authority, which was in Wyoming. And nearly 120,000 Japanese Americans and those of Japanese ancestry were incarcerated in these camps. And today, these camps are now museums, memorials, interpretive centers. There's a lot of it is still preserved, and there's a lot of pilgrimages that happen. So there's one coming up in July at Heart Mountain. So it's available for people to visit and learn about the history and the camps there. And I have some images that I thought were very impactful to share. So some of these images you see, there's some soldiers lined up who are armed, Japanese Americans and those of Japanese ancestry arriving to the camps. Some are preparing to leave for the camps. This image here, awaiting further instruction. The images on the bottom are of the camps. So many of the camps had barracks. This particular image is of Heart Mountain War Relocation Authority. And on the bottom right, just an image of the incarcerees cleaning the campgrounds. The interesting thing is that the camps were different from each other. I mean, the general camp was the same in terms of the barracks, but some of them were unlivable conditions, some were a little bit more furnished. And it was very interesting during the development and research phase of my film and talking with different survivors of the camps and hearing how they all had different experiences with the camps. Some of them were born in the camps, some of them were uprooted from their lives back home and brought to a completely new land that was barren and desolate. So this image here on the left, a lot of the camps had watchtowers with armed guards. And there's crazy stories about people getting shot, people dying in the camps, and a lot of the stuff is swept under the rug. The image on the right I thought was very impactful of these children looking out in the distance behind barbed wire. And it just makes you kind of think like, you know, these kids are leaving their friends back home and they're now in this camp, and some of them were born in the camps and just not even knowing what the real world is like beyond the barbed wires. So just wanted to share those images for those who aren't familiar with this period of history, just to get a visual grasp on things. So Desolate Dreams, were in the pre-production fundraising phase, and these are just some behind the scenes pictures from a teaser shoot that we did in September of last year. So essentially this teaser, I'll go to the next slide here. This teaser is a portrayal of the opening scene of Desolate Dreams. And what the opening scene is, consists of the Terminal Island arrests. So the day Pearl Harbor happened, actually I have a blurb here that I'll explain about that if you're not familiar with Terminal Island and what those arrests entailed. So the Terminal Island was an artificial island in the LA Harbor and Long Beach Harbor. And this was an American base of the Japanese fishing industry. And so when Pearl Harbor happened, many Japanese men were arrested. Some were community leaders, religious leaders. They were arrested and evacuated from Terminal Island. And so this took place when Pearl Harbor happened. And in my film, I'm showing a portrayal of those arrests, which took place in the evening or nighttime hour of the day Pearl Harbor happened. And then from there in the film, we were introduced to Robert Parker in the present day in the world of the film. And this teaser is available to view on the website. So if you'd like to learn more about Desolate Dreams and follow the film's journey, you can visit the website at desolategreamsfilm.com, and I've included a QR code there that goes directly to the website. And I also have the social media links as well. I encourage you all to follow the film and the journey. So we're on Instagram and Facebook at Desolate Dreams Film, and on Twitter at Desolate Film. And I've also included on the right side my social media handles and website if you're interested in finding out more about the work that I do, as well as upcoming projects. And yeah, with that, I just want to say thank you so much to the Garrett chapter of NAACP for having me be a part of this. It's such an honor. to be alongside these other AAPI professionals and uplifting AAPI heritage. So thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Kex. Really appreciate it. Like I shared in the chat, I had a high school girlfriend who her family was in the internment camp back home. They were from Gilroy, and so they had 2 or 3 days to take care of everything before they're taken off. And they decided to destroy or bury their family heirlooms in the backyard to keep it out of the hands of looters. So it's just amazing within living memory to think that you could be American one day and the next day it's gone. It's something we definitely need to, it's history we definitely need to tell and preserve for sure. But thank you so much, Kex. Appreciate it. All right, last but not least, we have our final speaker. Marlysse Colleen is a local Garrett County resident and college student. She also goes by the nickname Mar. Tonight, Mar will present on the history of AAPI stories in America, as well as the tumultuous events of 2020 that led to the Stop Asian Hate movement in order to educate and inspire change.
Hi, everyone. My name is Marlysse Colleen. I'm incredibly thankful to be here tonight. Thank you to the NAACP for inviting me. I can't believe that I thought about not going to that bonfire. Now I'm happy that I did. So I'm going to start the presentation. Yep,
That's great.
thank you. All right. My dad is an immigrant from the Philippines, and my mom's Caucasian. I'm really 100 times before tonight. May is AAPI History Month, and in honor of such, I made a presentation to talk about Asian history in America, movements for rights and social advancements, and how to move forward. And so this is a little overview of what I'm going to talk about tonight. What's going on, Asian American history, Asian issues, and how to stay informed and involved. So that was a map of Asia, and this is a quote. When we say Asian American, we're talking about so much more that can be fit into a single stereotype. I put both of those there to just illustrate that there's so much that is out there, that Asian American is not just this monolith, that we can be separated in so many different ways. According to the LOSCE, the term for Asian American encompasses at least 21 distinct groups. In 2019, people identify as Chinese, Indian, Filipino, Vietnamese, Korean, and Japanese, and they accounted for 85% of Asian Americans. I want to say that just to illustrate that history, just by the numbers of today, is so vast. And I'm not an expert by any means. I'm going to miss some major issues. So let's start with Stop AAPI Hate. Most commonly referred to as Stop Asian Hate. It's a current movement started by Asian Americans in response to the escalation of racism and racist motivated incidents as a result of COVID-19. We'll get to that later. The official Stop Asian Hate website was started by the Asian Pacific Planning and Policy Council, the Chinese for Affirmative Action, and the Asian American Studies Department of San Francisco University. It tracks in response to hate, violence, harassment, discrimination, shunning, and child bullying against Asian Americans and Pacific Islanders in the United States. That's a really great organization that started in response to some pretty terrible events. This issue just goes further than that. Racism against Asian Americans has unfortunately been pretty much a long-term thing. So let's take a look. The first Asian Americans were Filipinos. They were known back then as Luzonians or Manila men, after the Philippines' biggest island, Luzon, and their capital city, Manila. On October 17th, 1587, they set sail in what is now California. However, the first major wave of Asian immigration started in Hawaii. Between 1885 and 1924, around 30,000 Japanese immigrants arrived. Then in the early 1900s, Koreans had moved to Hawaii, was in the mainland, was caused by the gold rush around the 1850s. By 1880, the main Asian immigrant group was the Chinese. This is often referred to as the start of the major Asian discrimination. Let's talk about yellow peril. During 2020, that was probably something that was thrown around a lot that I saw on social media, and a term that a lot of people didn't really understand the history of. It is partially about how the skin color portrayed in media back then was yellow. And Asians are also depicted as, or used to be called yellow in racist terms. But the real meaning is many white Americans felt threatened by the increase in Chinese immigration and feared that Asians would invade their lands and disrupt Western values, like Christianity, technological innovation, and democracy. This fear of yellow peril caused quotas or limits on the amount of immigrants that were allowed in. In fact, in 1882, Congress passed the Chinese Exclusion Act, the only United States law to prevent immigration and naturalization based on race, which extruded Chinese immigration for the next 60 years. The Chinese Must Go movement was so strong that Chinese immigration in the United States declined from 39,500 in 1882 to only 10 in 1887. But this has happened before, and let's talk about that in a couple of other important Asian American stories. The naturalization of 1790 declared only free white persons were eligible to be US citizens. It in turn excluded many women, white indentured servants, and immigrants, and many Asians from the American dream. In 1890, Santa Ana burned its historic Chinatown to the ground after Wang Wo-yi contracted leprosy. As reported by the Los Angeles Times, over 1,000 people showed up on a drizzly night to cheer as firefighters doused buildings with coal oil and set them ablaze. An eyewitness gushed that it felt like a big picnic or a 4th of July. This paper said it was as picturesque as an event could be imagined. From a quarantine pen surrounded by barbed wire, where Rite Aid now stands today, former residents looked in flames engulfed their businesses, living quarters, and a vegetable garden. They received no restitution for their lost belongings and were ordered to leave. Yi, meanwhile, was denied treatment by his guards and left to die. In 1952, Congress passed the McCarran-Walter Act, Act of 1924, reinforcing this controversial system of immigrant selection. According to the Office of the Historian, a government website, the 1952 Act created symbolic opportunities for Asian immigration, although in reality, it continued to discriminate against them. The law repealed the last of the existing measures to exclude Asian immigration, allotted each Asian nation a minimum of 100 visas per year, and eliminated laws preventing Asians from becoming naturalized American citizens. At the same time, however, the new law only allotted new Asian quotas based on race instead of nationality. This all sounds pretty bad, but it gets worse, as it always does. Have you ever heard of the Rock Springs Massacre? Well, as the Library of Congress says, on September 7th, 1885, a mob of white coal miners attacked their Chinese co-workers, who were both employed by the same company, the Union Pacific Coal Company, in Rock Springs, Wyoming territory, over a dispute over who had the right to work in a particularly lucrative set of land. The violence occurred after Chinese workers refused to participate in a strike for higher wages planned by the American miners. 28 Chinese men were killed and 15 were wounded. 79 homes were set ablaze. The bodies of many of the dead and wounded were thrown into the flames. Several hundred Chinese workers were chased out of town and fled to the surrounding hills. Property damage was estimated at $150,000. That's horrifying and a symptom of anti-Asian, specifically Chinese mentality. Has this occurred in other communities? Absolutely. This is a picture of a Japanese Girl Scout troop in a Japanese internment camp, which was talked about by Kex earlier. As I will try to serve God and my country, they were surrounded by barbed wire and armed gunmen. America didn't like the Japanese much, even their own community, as President Roosevelt signed off on an executive order that rounded up entire communities of Japanese and put them in internment camps. Each relocation center was kind of like its own town, but like I stated before, surrounded by barbed wire, armed men. And imagine being a Girl Scout, pledging to a country that screamed you were a traitorous spy. You think people would have gotten a little angry after this, and we were, but it all boiled over with Vincent Chin. We're going to watch this interview about the Vincent Chin incident. I'm sure you're all sick of me talking. Let's take a moment. Can you hear it?
No, can't hear it.
I thought that it maybe wouldn't work.
Sometimes you have to click in the screen share. If you stop the screen share and then in the beginning it says, there's two options at the bottom of the screen, optimize for sound, and you have to click both those first.
I'm not sure if that worked. I did prepare something in case it didn't. Vincent Chin was the 1982 murder. Basically, he was out with his friends at a local bar about 8 days before his wedding, just having fun, maybe getting a drink with his friends before he got married at a bachelor's party. What was going on in Detroit at that time, or I think it was Chicago, was that there were a lot of mom and pop shops being run out by major American industry car manufacturers. So Vincent Chin wasn't involved in any of this, but two men had come up to him and started calling him slurs to his face. You know, they had thought that he was Chinese, but he was Korean. So they started yelling at him in his face. He was able to get away. These two men paid a man $20 to ride around the neighborhood to try to find him. They found him outside of McDonald's, took a baseball bat and killed him in broad daylight. The men were arrested, but were only sentenced to pay a fine for the murder of Vincent Chin. Afterwards, after public outcry, they finally have to pay for the rest of their lives what would have been the mortgage for Vincent Chin's house that he wouldn't to buy with his wife. The mayor at that time called it a license to kill, and it sparked so much outrage at that time. It brought so many communities together. And today, the fact that that isn't taught in many different classrooms about this event that changed so much and basically brought so much to the forefront of how just the injustice of it was. It's just so sad. And after all of it, we just needed a Stop Asian Hate community. But even with it, Asian Americans are getting attacked every day. Back in 2020, these few incidents could be taken as proof. Filipino-American Noah Quintero was riding the subway on Wednesday, February 3rd. A man approaches him and slices him across the face with a box cutter. No one calls 911 or rushes to help when he pleads. Quintero is forced to get off the subway and get help himself. He receives over 100 stitches. CNN journalist Carolyn Sung was trying to comply with a dispersal order from state troopers during a Minneapolis protest. They grabbed her by the backpack and shoved her to the pavement. Carolyn identified herself as a journalist in English and told them where her credentials were. Her white male colleague was released when he showed his credentials. A state trooper then got down and screamed in her face, "Do you speak English?" And she was held in police custody unlawfully for 2 hours. An unnamed Asian woman was brutally beaten outside a New York City apartment near Times Square. She was walking to church. He had kicked her in the stomach and head, all the while shouting racial slurs at her. Onlookers watched, and two security guards inside the apartment closed the door on her. The attacker was able to walk away. How do you help that out? How do you get involved and learn more? You can listen. Asian Americans are talking about the issue, and you can listen to them. If your friend gets heated about the subject, you can listen and allow them to be. When you see the story on the news or on Instagram or any other social media, you can share it and allow that space to be open for anyone to see and hear and listen. You can learn. I didn't cover everything. It's impossible to. So much about Asian life in America is out there and can't be covered by just me. So if you go home and do your part by learning about the silent history, ask about why you didn't hear about the Rock Springs Massacre or Vincent Shin. If you have any Asian American friends, try to honestly learn about what's going on and how they feel affected by what's going on in the country right now. You can help. Those incidents that I just said above, almost all of them could have been helped if somebody just stepped in. If somebody's being anti-Asian or racist, speak against them. Help us out. These Asian Americans are not the virus. Hatred is. Thank you for listening to me. And I think there is a Q&A. That's where you can find me. That's my number. So thank you so much for allowing me to speak tonight.
Thank you. That was amazing, Marlysse. Thank you so much. Wow.
So we do have a few questions here. The first one is for Ashwani Jain. This is from Charlene. Mr. Jain, any thoughts you'd like to share with regard to the Democratic Summit?
Yeah, thank you so much for that question. I might need some clarification on the question. I see the second question that I can also answer, but if there are specific questions related to the Democratic Summit, I'm happy to answer that as well.
Charlene?
Oh, Charlene, I think you might be on mute if you're trying to say something.
You and
There we
Mr.
go.
Barron impressed me as being intellectuals, and I just wonder how you felt about, because I saw you guys as better politicians overall than almost anyone in the room, you know, except you didn't win. And I just wondered how you felt about that particular
Gotcha.
niche that you've sort of fallen into, you know.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I was happy to be a part of, so this was for everyone else, this is the Western Maryland Democratic Summit that was a couple of weeks ago. They had pretty much every statewide candidate for every office there in attendance. And so I was really proud to make the case that, you know, as an underdog candidate, we still had more volunteers than any other candidate who's doing well in the polls or fundraising, why that doesn't matter in terms of actually winning. And actually, if you're trying to change the political process, here are the things that we actually need to do. They did take a poll afterwards, and we didn't win that poll, but it made sense because that wasn't indicative of real voters, right? It was just campaign volunteers from different candidates that were in attendance. If you were there, right, you go into the room and you have 100 people who are of, one candidate with their shirts on. You have 40 volunteers who have a different candidate shirts on. So naturally, when they vote, right, if you're a volunteer for a campaign and you're asked to do a poll, you're going to vote for your candidate. So it's not really reflective. And polls in general are not really reflective of actual voters, especially if, in my case, I'm running a campaign where I'm expanding the base. I'm going to Garrett County, for example, consistently. I'm going to areas where, don't have a big voting block and are typically forgotten about by candidates, at least on the Democratic side. But they would vote if they get excited enough, especially in a non-presidential election. So our message on this campaign has been the same for the last year and a half. We're not focused on fundraising. We're not focused on polling. That does not win elections, especially for underdog candidates. What wins elections is having a most detailed policy platform, consistently going out of your way to show up and making it easier for residents to engage with you as a candidate, and expand the base and have a good ground game by getting the most volunteers. And in those aspects, we've checked all those boxes.
Thanks. We have another question from Adele. What was it like for Ashwani growing up with your heritage? And this can kind of go for all our panelists as well.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'll go to that, and then I'll defer to the other two amazing speakers. So for me, I am Indian American, but I don't come from a political or well-connected family. My grandfather immigrated to this country from India with very limited resources, but found work as a high school maintenance worker to provide for his family and achieve his American dream. My mother went to community college and worked at a nursing home where she made the minimum wage at that time of $3.25 an hour just to pay for her classes. My father, and this is something that a lot of immigrants go through, but my father, despite being highly educated in India, struggled to find work here because of the language barrier. After my parents got married, they decided to move to Maryland, start a business, start a family. They were always working, so I practically grew up in their store, and I saw how hard they worked to keep the lights on in our 2-bedroom apartment. But that experience, seeing what my family went through and what they taught me, it really showed the importance of giving back to a society that has given us so much, and not to take anything for granted, to work extra hard, especially because of our names and the color of our skins. And if we are lucky enough to open the doors of opportunity for ourselves, we have an obligation to keep that door open for everyone behind us. And so I'm really proud of the family that I grew up in and that heritage that I feel really relates well to the campaign that we're running right now.
Thank you.
Did you open that
Yeah,
question
thanks.
up?
Go ahead, Mar. Thank you.
Yeah, the growing up, mixed is definitely a challenge in so many different ways. I feel as though everybody got it wrong. I've been called Japanese, I've been called Chinese, I've been called Hispanic. A person looked at me and said, "Your sister is really hot for a Latina," which was wrong in so many different ways.
Yeah.
I've been asked, did your parents marry for love, or was it a green card marriage? I've been asked, just people feel like they can, especially around here, if you are the spokesperson, and growing up, I not only had this culture clash, but also the fact that I also had to inform everybody else of this culture they didn't know anything about. I had to be like, yeah, we do eat rice every night in my home. No, the shoes don't go outside, but we do have a room where we just put the shoes. I had to explain so much that I felt like if anywhere else, I didn't have to explain. And growing up like that, and still growing up like that, I feel to learn and to try and teach everybody else, which is why I made that presentation. So thank you for the question.
Yeah, similar to me as well. I feel like the first question I get a lot is, "What are you?" And it's like, I'm human, but yeah, it's just, there's tons of stories I could tell about it, and it would take up so much time, but it's definitely something I faced growing up, of this whole oh, but are you more Black than Japanese, or which side do you identify more with? It's like, well, I'm both. And it's like the conversation can go on and on and on. And the interesting thing too is, which is another film I'm working on, touching on even within the Asian community and Black community, there's this kind of prejudiceness that goes on in those within their own communities, and also being mixed too. So that, yeah, there's just so many things I could say about this, but just keep it generalized.
Thanks, you all. So we have another question. This one is from Samantha. It says, have you experienced the model minority stereotype? And if so, how? We can actually start with you, Kex. And then Mara and Ashwani can go on.
I think I have to think about this more, sorry. I have to think about my response, if that's all right.
Sorry, I didn't mean to put anyone on the spot. It was just something that I recently read about and hadn't known anything about before. And I don't know if somebody wants to even explain what it is, or if everybody here already knew what it was. It was new to me.
Ashwani, would you explain that? Because I'm sure you must have experienced it.
Yeah, and if there's a different thing that you're trying to get to, please let me know. And I don't want to cut off the other two speakers. But yeah, I mean, in terms of a model minority, so the way that I understand that, the way that it's been presented to me, and the way that I always get put in that limelight, whether I want it or not, is, oh, because I am usually the only person of color in a room or one of the few people of color in a room, that everything I do reflects upon my entire people, and everyone who looks like me or everyone who has my kind of name. So that's what it means by model minority. And I think for a lot of us, and again, I think the other two speakers they alluded to this as well, but they might also have similar experiences. We don't ask to be put in some of these positions. It is something, but at the same time, I don't take it for granted. I do know that I am in a position where I have a platform, however big or however small. And yes, I do know that because I am, breaking down certain barriers, because I am one of few people who's trying to run for these kinds of offices, at least in my aspect, that hopefully if I do a good job and if I stay doing a good job, then more people who are like me, whether in age or culture, will not be discounted right away from others in the establishment, from, older folks, from whiter folks. And so I do tend to kind of be extra studious and really over prepare for all the different things that I will be doing. Part of that is because of my culture and heritage and the fact that I do want to represent my people well and show that, we are capable of being in these offices and sitting at these tables. But also, it also applies to the fact that I am young. So there's that age factor as well, that a lot of young people are also considered, oh, you're just too ambitious. You don't know what you're talking about. You're just sit down and let the adults handle the conversation, even though we have our own lived experiences that are important, that are valued. So I feel those kind of touch on, at least in terms of what I see and what I do. Yes, it can be intimidating and extra pressure that maybe other communities and other individuals don't have to go through. But I take it more of kind of a badge of honor, and hopefully that one day something that I'm doing will open up doors so that it's not just one model minority, but there's a whole room full of folks that actually represent, the kind of issues we're trying to solve.
Devin left a response as well to that question. So he says, yes, speaking for myself, this is a distinction that veils this notion that Asians have to be high achievers. Asians and Pacific Islanders, as Mar said, are, shocker, not monolithic. We're human too. Many Asian Americans feel they may have to perform or be seen at a certain level in order to be seen as American. Another response, every country I've been in, you're that spokesperson for multiracial people. They live in two different worlds, but oftentimes don't feel completely accepted or recognized in either world. That one was from Devin as well. Did Kex, you or Mar want to speak on it?
Yeah. I feel like the model minority myth, they've been calling it. And basically it feeds into assimilation as well. Personally growing up and knowing my dad's story and knowing everything, I think both of them feed into just how you want to assimilate so well when you're an immigrant in a new country. You want to, be accepted and speak the language, walk and talk like everybody else and have a job and get this American dream. That you also perpetuate the model minority myth by doing it. It feeds into each other, kind of like a toxic relationship of just, you want to be, the top of your game. And also by doing that, it perpetuates that everybody else has to also be this model minority. Everybody else that falls out of it essentially is gonna, they'll feel bad about not being able to assimilate in, or it's just this terrible roundabout circle that happens just from, that simple term and those stereotypes. There's so much history that goes behind it.
Definitely. We have another question here from Devin. This one is actually for you, Kex. He said, I'd like to ask about the process. How does your ethnic mix inform framing of Desolate Dreams?
Yeah, so if I'm understanding correctly, Devin, are you referring to just in general like why I decided to look at those two ethnic backgrounds.
He's gonna have to type it in. Yes, he
Oh.
said yes.
Oh, that's right. His mic doesn't work. Yeah. So.
Yes, not.
Yeah, so from research, I actually initially, when I first started writing Desolate Dreams, it wasn't even looking at Black and Asian solidarity. It was a little bit more true to Bill Shishima's story and their friendship with a Mexican-American family. But I wanted to put my myself in this and the culture that I was raised in. So that really just came from researching the history at the time, and as mentioned in the presentation, coming across this African-American newspaper and then stumbling across other articles about the African-American community and how they really were making efforts to combat race discrimination, and also how both cultures were facing discrimination in America. I mean, there's Jim Crow South happening, and then with the incarceration camps that were taking place and the prejudice and propaganda that was going on about Japanese Americans, kind of was the process of framing Desolate Dreams. So that in a nutshell is how that came about.
Awesome, thank you.
All right, Shauna, I think I'm gonna step in unless there's another questions.
There was one more question here
Okay.
from Adele for Marlysse. She said, would you share that you had the talk? She said, that hit me so hard. I'm not exactly sure what that means, but.
Oh, it's very vague, but I got what she was asking. Basically, during the height of 2020 and all of this incidents that are occurring, there were easy targets. You could push over a grandma and you could beat up like an old man. It was a terrible thing, but they're easy targets against the Asian American community. And I remember during that all happening, I was reading a couple stories at the dinner table and I was getting so upset. And I just was terrified for my dad to go into the city. I was terrified that something would happen to him being a part of that, older demographic. I didn't want anything to happen to him. And he was also telling us just be careful and everything. And having that talk was just so impactful, of having to finally admit that like something is going on and our family could be so negatively impacted, even here in Garrett County. And it was just, that stuck with me for so long, even 2 years later, because I just thought, like, I can't believe that we had to have a talk of what to do in that situation and what, like, just preparing for the inevitability. We thought it was just so inevitable that something was going to happen to each other. Yeah, thanks, Adele.
Thanks again. Go ahead, Sam.
Okay, I'm gonna pinch it for Devin now and introduce Don. First of all, I guess, though, I should thank the speakers because you guys were wonderful. It was so informative. And if anybody has any questions, maybe we could put up in the link, hopefully Devin can put up in the link ways to contact us, or if you have any questions. But what I'm going to do now is I've actually got Dawn on the phone, and I'm going to screen share. This is called creative zooming. And Dawn, are you there?
I am.
Okay, let me just put you on speaker here. Hold on a second. Turn up the volume. I'm going to screen share a couple of pictures, and Dawn is going to talk about the AME Church project. Okay, so we're not going to share sound. Is everybody seeing this, the first picture here?
Mhm.
Okay, and let me share another one. So that's the outside of the Bethel AME Church. Are you seeing this picture? The inside?
Yes.
And this
Yes.
is Mr. Yoder,
wait.
who owned
Not
the
the
AME.
inside.
Not the inside yet? Okay, I'll share the second one. Hold on a second. There's the inside. And then I'm gonna go to the third picture and have Don. Here we go. And Don, go ahead.
Okay, I hope everyone can hear me. We had a very historic special day about 3 weeks ago at the Bethel AME Church building on the Sam Yoder farm. We had approximately 20 of the descendants of the congregation of Bethel AME Church present, along with Pastor Hudson, who was just retired from Dickerson AME Church in Frostburg. He came and conducted the worship service, which of course featured wonderful music, all a cappella. There were probably about 20, besides the 20 descendants, there were, I would say, at least 20 other folks, members of the chapter and some members of the Bethel committee. But it was just an incredible get-together to be in the building. The one picture shows Tiffany Fisher, the president of the Allegheny chapter, speaking to the group gathered inside. And to realize that, you know, their great-grandparents, their great-uncles, their great-aunts were folks who actually worshiped in that very space at least 100 years ago and longer. And certainly the first time that it recurred was just a couple weeks ago. And very, very special for everybody involved, particularly the descendants. And then after the service, we gathered at Mountain Lake Park Town Hall. The weather was terrible, cold and rainy. We were hoping to gather at the new site where there is a pavilion and have refreshments there, but it was just too miserable outside. So we gathered at Town Hall and had a really great time together, just talking, and a real good time of fellowship. They wanted very much to meet there before we actually began to dismantle the building, which should begin within the next few weeks. The next event, though, that everybody should know about and are certainly invited to will be on Saturday, June 25th at 9 a.m. And that will be a ceremonial groundbreaking at the new site. It's located on G Street in Mountain Lake Park, really virtually the intersection of G Street and Route 135 on a very large piece of property where the Apostolic Church is located. But First United Bank has a volunteer group, they've had that for quite a while. And the group has been really anxious to do something in this project. So the bank is allocated a grant of $500 to purchase breakfast food for that day, for that event. And so we'll do a little groundbreaking, and then we'll have breakfast together in the pavilion that I mentioned before, which is located literally a stone's throw away from the new site. So all are invited to that. We kept the previous event under wraps just a little bit because I think I've mentioned this before. We have not really shouted from the mountaintops about this project because we did not want to risk the building to some unscrupulous handful of folks who might decide that they weren't going to let this happen. And I think you know what I mean. So, but by that time, the building should be dismantled and secure in the space that it's being renovated. And so we will be able to broadcast at a much greater level the project. And so everybody at this meeting and beyond is certainly invited, 9 o'clock, June 25th, G Street, Mountain Lake Park. And that's pretty much where we are right now with the project.
Thank you, Don.
Yeah, thank you so much, Dawn. This is a wonderful, wonderful opportunity for us to be able to practice unity rather than disunity and disinformation.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Mhm.
And now I think Shauna is going to share with us the next event after your event, Dawn.
Great. Okay.
I'm going to keep you on so you can listen to it too. So we can hopefully
Okay.
you might be providing the tent hopefully for the next thing.
Okay. Thank you.
Hey everyone. So I just realized I haven't even introduced myself this whole time. My name is Shauna. I'm the Garrett County NAACP's treasurer, for those that may not know. So Juneteenth, we will be celebrating or joining Allegheny and Washington County this year for our national holiday Juneteenth. It's going to start from the 17th through the 19th. The weekend's going to kick off Friday night with Allegheny County's annual Freedom Fund dinner. It's going to have catered food from Firefly Farms, guest speakers, and music. So that's going to be amazing. Saturday, there's going to be several things going on. First things, the parade, they're going to be Black History tours, including a visit to the Emmanuel Episcopal Church, Underground Railroad. The parade's going to be from Washington Street to Canal Place with the junior youth dancers and our Harriet Tubman float. It's going to be amazing. And then we're going to have a free community pig roast and cookout. All that's going to be at Canal Place on Saturday. Saturday evening, there's going to be a one-act play at the Emmanuel Episcopal Church as well. And then on Sunday, we're going to have the gospel performances, African storytelling. The event's going to be amazing. We do need some volunteers. Throughout the whole weekend, there's going to be live music, health fair, a kids zone, and multiple booths. Like I said, we definitely need some volunteers to sign up for the booths, shifts between Saturday and Sunday afternoons. More hands definitely are going to be needed to set up, tear down, clean up, everything between Friday through Sunday. There's a link in the chat. Devin's already put it in there for our contact email, contact@gcnaacp.org. There's going to be a sign-up sheet, all hands on deck. We definitely need as much help as we can get.
Thanks, Shauna. That was great. It looks like Devin put the sign-up sheet in the chat as well. So you just can click on that. It's a sign-up genie. So you can, if you get on fast, you can get the slot you want. If you wait, you may have to get a different slot. So there's a little incentive. And I think that wraps all of that up. So I think now we're up to our president's closing remarks.
Before I give some kind of closing remarks, I do want to say that we're taking a much more active level of participation in Juneteenth. The Washington branch, the Garrett County branch, and of course, Allegheny's branch are all part of it. And it has become a really big, big event. And so the volunteering is absolutely needed. When last conversation that I had with Tiffany Fisher, the president of the Allegheny branch number 7007, 007. Sorry, I can't help thinking of that. She said, particularly with the setup at the beginning and the tear down and clean up at the end. And I know that's when everybody's tired out and wants to go home and crawl in bed, but we need to help, our partners from Allegheny County. So please do sign up there. This has been a wonderful, wonderful presentation, in my humble opinion. And every time, it's like each time we have a meeting, the information that comes across seems to exceed what went before. I am so proud of what the executive committee has been putting together. I mean, really, because even in the last 3 months, we have learned so much firsthand from people who were there. And it's up to us to take the positive view of humanity as humanity. That, I know this sounds a little hokey, but that all people are brothers and sisters. Sometimes that's hard to swallow when I see the Trump train or something like that go, when I see people who are capable of hatred and doing hateful things and taking people's lives. It's appalling, and it's up to each one of us to be able to make the change that we want to see. Thank you all for coming tonight. And be sure and thank all the members of the executive committee, Devin, Sam, Shauna, Adele, and our committee chair people, because they're what's making all of this happen. I just do the introduction. Thank you and good night.
Thank you. Good night.
Thank
Good
you
night.
all.
Thank you
Thanks,
to our
ma'am.
speakers.